Yeah, we all watched Scorsese's Taxi Driver. This is probably my maybe I don't know, maybe like my 10th time watching the movie. I'm sure Jessica has seen it a bunch of times already as well. And I mean, every time that I watch this movie, right, there's more and more that you could get out of it. And there's stuff that's always sort of I mean, you know that the themes exist. People talk about them, but little by little you start noticing how all the details do cohere, like the whole sort of sketch of Taxi Driver. As you see a lot of reviews talking about that this is just kind of like this dreamscape. And watching it this time, like specifically looking for details for that perspective, one thing I noticed for the first time is how many, it seems to me, like how many racial hangups Travis Bickle tends to have, right? They're very understated, and they're also counter to what he actually says explicitly, right?
Yeah,
He
he
said,
kind of like the camera like lingers a lot when he's like in
mhm,
the diner or in places. It just like lingers on random black people around the way it
mhm,
doesn't for anyone else. Like despite his like general paranoia towards people, you don't really see that to the same extent with any other group of people. It's just
yeah.
constant, like him kind of while his friends are or while the other cabbies are talking to him in the diner, and he's there like kind of off in this little reverie, staring at the guys
Mhm.
sitting at the other table.
I'm not sure if Laura, you noticed this, or Jessica, if you noticed this rewatching the movie, but so like when he's at the diner, right before, so we have that wonderful little image of he drops the Alka-Seltzer into
Hmm.
the water,
Yeah.
and this seems like a really like great metaphor for what's going on, like with him mentally. Right, he's not presented as an extremely intelligent character or anything, right? Quite the contrary. And it seems as if like there's this kind of, it's like a bubbling up of this kind of chaos. It could sort of bubble over at some point, but it's also very sort of like inchoate and like non-specific, right? It's just this kind of bubbling underneath. Like there's no actual focus to maybe some of the
Yeah.
things that he wants to do, and eventually he does find a little bit of focus.
That's sort of his overall like that's one of the big points of his character though. Like he says at the start he was just looking for a direction,
Hmm.
and like in reference to him taking the job, and it's kind of like he's just completely like purposeless in a lot of ways, and he just sort of like any bit of purpose he finds. I think it's interesting because he sort of like looks for purpose in ways that are quite common. Like he finds, he attaches himself almost like at random and to like arbitrarily to like this beautiful woman, like for no other
Hmm.
reason than he sees
Hmm.
her, she's attractive to him, like he knows nothing else about her. And it's like he lives this such an anomic kind of existence that he's just looking for anywhere. And it's kind of like, it's not even unusual, for somebody, not even gendered, I was going to say, like any young man or woman, like, okay, you find someone of the opposite sex that's attractive and you kind of use them for purpose. But like, he sort of, even his attitude to Senator Palantine, like he's kind of, when he praises him when he's in the back of the taxi, it comes across to me at least as being entirely genuine when he praises him. But then, then he start just mere few weeks later, he's like preparing his plan to assassinate him, and all that's changed in that regard is his attitude towards Betty. Like it's
Hmm.
not.
Hmm.
It's kind of like his Palatine's meaning to him is entirely like sort of filtered through Betty's perspective on him.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Like he's sort of like, because now like Betty before was his sort of locus of direction in life, and now like he hates it now. She rejected him and he's resentful to her, so she's still his like focus in life, just in a negative sense. Like he's entirely like sort of, it's like he has no ability for that. He has a lot of focus and he has a lot of capability and sort of drive when he sets his mind to it, but it's like he has no actual inherent kind of means to like pick a direction that means something to him as a person. He needs to just sort of parasitically grab onto someone or
Hmm.
something else to focus all that energy somewhere.
Hmm. I do
Yeah.
think it's like when she rejects him is sort of like the beginning of when he starts to snap.
Hmm.
And like I had written in my review about sort of like there are moments in the film where things with him sort of move in a slow motion kind of way, because you sort of, the taxi goes slow and he's staring at the Alka-Seltzer and he's just fixating on certain things. And I always really like that scene. I talk about that scene where he goes out, and it's a great scene where he's talking to the wizard, and they're like, go
Hmm.
talk to the wizard. And you know this guy, you've seen him before. He's like the older guy who hasn't done anything in his life. But what is so great about the scene is like he acts like his life was his choice, when really he's just he hasn't have any motivation. So he's like, why don't I own my own cab? It must be because I don't want to. And he acts like he says it like so declarative, and then he goes on that like that ridiculous like pseudo philosophical tirade. He's like, doctor, another guy's a lawyer, people are born. I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. And it's sort of in that moment, that's after Betty rejects him, he's reaching out to him. He's like, I got some bad ideas in my head. He doesn't know how to say it. And so like, even when he tries to reach out, like with Betsy, with Betsy or with this guy or whomever, he misses. And I think the only person that he probably has anything that he can talk to is probably the Jodie Foster character when they have breakfast that one morning. She's like, I don't know who's weirder, you or me.
One thing I want to touch on again that I didn't quite get to yet. So back in that diner scene after the Alka-Seltzer, I'm not sure if you guys noticed it, but it seemed to me that first, before he drops the tablets and he sees what looks like some sort of black gangster eating over there, but after he drops it and he's sort of like, has this kind of reverie or whatever, he looks, or rather the camera, there's like enough plausible deniability, like any sort of like dreamlike image, I feel like is sort of presented with a lot of plausible deniability that it might in fact just be ordinary reality. And when the camera sort of goes back, it's as if there's no more black man sitting in that seat, right? Whether it's because he dozed off for a long time or maybe he never actually existed, right? This is just kind of like yet another figment of if he has like racial hangups, he'll have more and more examples of this, down the road. Or that other time, right, when there's that robbery, right? There's a black man robbing the convenience store. It's presented in this way that could very well be a dream because so first he shoots and kills him, right? Which most people are never going to be in that situation. But then the thing that makes it seem like a dream even more is how after this man is shot and is just lying clearly dead, the guy behind the counter jumps over, takes a bat and just starts hitting him, right? Instead of like immediately trying to, drag him away somewhere so this isn't seen because you could get in a lot of trouble for this, obviously. He just starts hitting him as if, this is Travis Bickle's own sort of imagination of how he maybe feels about certain people, that he comes across. You have like lots of images, like at the very beginning when you see him walking around with the alcohol. He's just kind of like walking down this street and there's this kind of like a dissolved sort of a effect with the camera. And it's the same exact street and he's still walking the same area, but now he has like a paper bag in his hand, and you never see him like crazily drunk or anything like that, but you have this sort of like feeling that he's always on, this sort of like slight edge of not being quite sober, right? There's always like, some kind of like edge to where he is, like in terms of any sort of substances or any kind of, like heightened little experience or whatever, or dulled experience, right? However you want to put it.
Yeah, I think as well, like he mentions at the start, and you see throughout, he like is barely sleeping throughout this whole thing as well. So I think like a lot of these sort of effects sort of reflect this like weird hazy sort of foggy state that he must be in through a lot of, especially the initial part of the film where before he kind of gains this purpose in life. So
yeah, he doesn't know what he wants to do. It's sort of like it's like he's a Joey but without the art longing. It's some kind of like achievement longing. He doesn't know what to do, so he thinks, oh, Palatine, I'll assassinate him, or that didn't work, and then it just so happens to have fallen in his favor with the crime at the end. It just randomly fell in his favor where he's like the hero. And
regarding the crime, like the shooting up at the end, and like what Alex said about the racial element, is when I was like, before this, I was like just doing a bit of Googling about it, and apparently one of the things that has been stated, I think, by Scorsese and Paul Schrader as well, is that initially the pimp and the pimps and the John as well were all supposed to, that he kills at the end, they were all supposed to be black characters. They're supposed to be played by black actors, and supposedly this was something that was changed because it would be too like inflammatory to have such a scene at the end of Travis Bickle killing these three black characters. So And I don't know how true that is, but it kind of does put an interesting, it would only add to the whole like tension. And I feel like then in that case, a lot of the kind of aspects earlier with his clear paranoia and wariness of Black people would sort of play into that, or sort of foreshadow that in a way.
Yeah. You notice how when he finally starts cultivating this idea of, maybe there is some, so like in terms of like all of this being circumstantial, yeah, he does sort of like by accident get to become a hero. He does have like an initial that positive response to Palantine, but just being in the car, you don't. It could be simply because like the viewer knows this, but Travis doesn't, or it could just be like purely subjective through his point of view, where you definitely do get the sense that Palantine is a kind of slimy sort of a character, right? A very kind of like maybe typical politician. He reminds me, in fact, like when you do see him give his little speeches and his commentary. A lot of the verbiage, right, is very similar to, I'm not sure, Laura, if you've ever seen the film Nashville, but in Nashville, it starts with like a sort of like political, announcement through this car, right? I forget the name of the guy who's running, but he's also pretty nondescript in his politics. He's kind of like a mirror where you could put whatever ideology that you want on these people, though like back there it's kind of like from the perspective of Southern, this is in New York City, so this has kind of like more of a liberal veneer, but you definitely get the sense that Palantine is a little bit slimy, and although like he's not he doesn't deserve assassination, there's this odd thing that happens in the movie where you feel a bit more on Travis's side than you do on Palantine's side, right?
I think as well with that, like it's interesting to me, and like the whole like scene in the car where Travis is praising him, is that like it kind of was nearly in contrast to the earlier scenes you see at the headquarters where Betsy and I forget his name, the guy that she kind of has a flirtatious thing, her coworker.
Albert Brooks, but his real name was Albert Einstein. Did you know that?
No.
Was it?
It is, yeah. Albert Brooks, his real name, yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like they're like talking about supporting him, but in this nearly like sarcastic kind of way, like this kind of like, oh, like he does that whole exchange between like, oh, you sound like you're selling mouthwash or something like that, and it's near like the advertising, and they're kind of like laughing about it, and it's all very like it's that typical like political cynicism and kind of like, oh, like they're on his side compared, but like when you compare it then to the earnestness that Travis talks about Palantine, it's like either positive or negative. He shows a lot more energy and just and like misguided sort of earnestness and passion towards whatever it is he sets his mind to than these people do, like than than his actual campaign workers do. And it's just, I think it's just something that's a very telling moment about Travis.
Well, he goes up to her. If you notice how he asks her out, he's really kind of invasive. He's like, I can see you're not a happy person. And it's just sort of like she takes to it, probably because she finds him attractive, which DeNiro was. And you're just like, it's just so odd because he doesn't even know her, and he's just like, I can see. And then they go out and he goes, that guy you work with, I don't like him. Not that I don't like him. He's just silly. And it's just, so he's already showing jealousy. And so like right there, you do see some red flags that I'd be like, oh, I don't know about this guy. But
oddly enough, do you think that he's necessarily wrong with some of the kind of, out of the blue, assessments that he makes?
I
think that's the interesting, like from her perspective.
I think like it was really well done, because like what he says like isn't wrong, and like he's probably at least fairly on the money with some of the stuff about her being unhappy and maybe she's kind of looking to make this guy jealous or whatever, but like at the same time he's not saying it due to any actual insight into her. He's saying it out of pure projection and wishful thinking. Like it just so happens that this is such a common state for people in general, that he manages to be right because of how predictable most people are going to be in this situation.
He's not wrong, but he's also probably not in the place right then to say it. He doesn't even know her.
Exactly.
So it's like a little soon to tell someone all that. So that's what I mean. He's so
he doesn't know her. He doesn't know her. He's kind of nearly like just shooting this out there because he wants this to be true, and he just happens to be right. And I think as well, like just what you meant, like like DeNiro playing him, it's just like I do think it was a very good choice to have him being played by like somebody you know, like Robert De Niro was very handsome at the time. It's like it was a good choice to have him played by someone good looking, because I think it really highlights just how like weird and invasive and just odd his mannerisms and the way his way of talking to her, not just on the date, but you get the sense he just comes out as a bit off to people in general. Like when he's talking to the guy getting the job, and it's just, it really highlights that. Whereas I feel like if you had him played by a guy who's a little bit more like, you know, plain looking or greasy looking or whatever, like I feel like that wouldn't highlight his oddness as much as it does,
because you'd expect it. You'd expect, oh, he's just a weirdo. This guy, he's better looking than Albert Brooks, at least I think so. And you know, but yeah, he's weird. And then he takes her out, and he's like, you know, I don't know much about movies. I don't know much about music. I don't know what his stance on welfare is, but I'm sure it's a good one. He doesn't know anything. It's like he's just lived in this bubble. And he's like, he honestly thinks taking a woman on a first date to a porn film is normal. He just doesn't even occur to him. And he's honest, he's doing it out of earnestness. He really is trying. And
like, I got the impression with it as well. It's like it was a Swedish porno film, so it's like he probably you could imagine him thinking that it's classy because it's not just any porno; it's a foreign porno.
There's like an artsiness, there's
exactly,
an
it's like that's just like you could really imagine that being his thought process, like.
And notice he says, you know, don't worry about it. A lot of couples go to movies like this, and when he sits down, there's a black couple in front, and they're straight up, you know, they seem to be together, like they are honestly there to enjoy the movie, right? So he's also technically, like, this is the weird part, right? He's technically not wrong about some of these things that he does. And notice how, like, during this like second date, first you just feel kind of like, you know, like very bad for him that he thinks that all of this is normal, that this is appropriate. Then it starts getting, you know, more creepy when he's grabbing at her, and then of course like the character is sort of taken to the brink of being totally, you know, you lose sort of like all empathy with him when he like shows up to her work, starts screaming, starts, you know, kind of like going nuts. But as soon as we're sort of taken to the brink, immediately after we get that scene with the character in the back of the cab who's played by Scorsese, and this guy's actually, you know, totally, you know, insane. He's talking about killing his wife, right? He's talking about it in very graphic detail because she's cheating on him, and of course, yet again, it's with a black person. Right. So there's that racial element comes back again. And as he's being told in graphic detail how this guy wants to kill his wife, Bickle,
which I quote in the review. I quoted in my review, by the way.
Yeah. So and Travis Bickle is just sort of staring at him, and we definitely get the sense that Bickle knows that what this guy is saying is bad and wrong, right? And although, you know, Bickle could, you know, confront a woman and sort of go nuts, maybe grab at her arm, he's not going to behave in this kind of way. So that empathy for the character is immediately reestablished just by, you know, putting him next to someone that is actually, you know, insane. That is one of these sort of, you know, classic New York City characters that might very well be just something coming up from his own imagination, right? That bringing again that racial element into it could very well be, you know, he's sort of imagining some of these things. And you notice how later on, soon after, there's another scene where he's just driving maybe in Harlem or whatever, and a bunch of black kids throw rocks and eggs at his car. And it seems as soon as he brings the car in, although they broke the windshield, you don't see any broken glass. You don't see, you know, again, there's plausible deniability. Maybe he cleaned it up. Maybe this is like a week later, but still there's enough evidence there that you could say this is, you know, there is something dreamlike going on here. These are, you know, these like black children are kind of like these little, you know, these little like monsters of his imagination. You know, they're very nondescript. You don't see their faces. They're just dark. You know, this is just kind of like a representation of some of these fears. You know, I just saw like so many more details like this this time around. Just I feel like if you take like any sort of like lens that people typically use to view the film from, you'll accumulate, if you like focus on those things as you do a rewatch, you'll accumulate more and more pieces of evidence in that particular direction. So it's very well crafted in that regard.
Well, you know, one of the things I also find really amazing is how, honestly, really relatable Travis is, despite the fact that he's going crazy and he's this cab driver and he's alone. I mean, I watch it and I actually feel sorry for him. Like, I feel empathy for him. I mean, he's not a psychopath. He's just lonely. He's so lonely, he's losing his mind. I mean, that's really what it is, I think. And he just doesn't know. He's like, I want to do something, but I don't know what it is. And he wants to help or make a difference. And again, from his perspective, what he considers good is a matter of perspective, good or evil. Remember, because he thinks that maybe in that moment, assassinating Palantine, that he's doing a good thing, even though technically, you're committing a crime and you're taking away someone's life. So we would say, no, that's not a good thing. But, clearly at the end with the shootout, he thinks he's doing a good thing. And then society also agrees with that. Oh, he did a good thing. So again, good and evil being a matter of perspective. And I've noted that in another film review I wrote, which maybe we'll talk about later in the show that's unrelated, but about the perspective of good and evil and what is good, what is not, depending on who you ask, can really vary,
I think just what you said of him not being a psychopath, like I reread Dan's on Cosmoetica review of Taxi Driver, and he kind of makes an argument regarding Travis being usually labeled as psychotic or a psychopath, that if you're going to kind of diagnose him with anything, he fits more so borderline personality disorder or something along those lines. And I do think there's definitely an argument to be made for that, because of the fact that that's kind of fundamentally a disorder of one's sense of self and personality, and then all the emotional issues that come along with that. So, and I think that if anything definitely describes Travis. He seems to have no actual concrete sense of who he is in the world, and and he just kind of, and so many of his plight, so much of his plight just stems from that, really. Even when you see the letter he writes to his parents, even, and you kind of wonder, okay, well, what's his family like? And you'd nearly be sort of, I suppose, primed to think, well, is there any clues as to why he is the way he is? But then instead you just kind of are bombarded by this these delusions that he sort of feeds them, or he sort of is just using them just to try and bolster himself up, or maybe lying to them to try and protect them from the reality of what is going on. You don't know, but I just think it was a very wise decision in regard to the screenplay to not really clue us on why is Travis the way he is. You get little bits that can maybe you can infer why Party is the way it is, but it was just a good decision not to, because it's he in a fundamental way seems to have no idea. He's just so anomic. I've said that word before, but he really is. And it's just he just exists in this, and he's just kind of drifting along, and he just and he's sort of grasping, and it's he has all this energy and nowhere to put it until he nearly at random grasps
and
onto
he's
something.
So sad. He spends his money on guns, and he lives in this shitty apartment, and you just don't see any way out for him.
Yeah.
And I mean, his life is very different from my life, but I'm not going to lie and say I've not felt some, I think, relatability to him, there's this, I think anyone who's ever felt alone would identify with that. And, it's sort of it's, I mean, not to use the cliche, our deepest, darkest kind of actions, or, you wouldn't do them, but sometimes you just have that bubbling up. And most of us, though, as Ebert noted in his review, he said, most of us just handle it better. We just know how to manage it. He doesn't.
He seems to have no way of handling it, and no people in his life that could have potentially helped him to handle it. Because, and it's just kind of, I don't know, I think regarding the relatability of it, I think it's very, I think just it struck me when I was thinking back on it that it's very applicable and very kind of relatable to, it's a very prescient film for one made in the 70s to the 21st century, kind of the level of isolation that you see, and even anyone that's spent any amount of time online, it's nearly too obvious and trite to point out that he nearly comes off as a prototype for the sort of personality that you now see on Incel. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's nearly trite, but it's true, and it's it's kind of even just the it's interesting because it's in the 70s there's this level of alienation and anonymity that was maybe only really apparent in the midst of such a massive city as New York. But nowadays that sort of anonymity is everyone is like immersed in it now thanks to the internet, especially post COVID, because it struck me with the scene with the character, the crazy guy talking about his wife played by Martin Scorsese. It's like it really, in some ways, it reminded me of like, you know, you see on like things like Reddit or other sites where people will like confess things, you know, like you'll have those subreddits where people will have these confessions, and some you see the most fucked up things sometimes, now whether they're true or not, but it's like nearly it struck me as like that's very similar. Like he's just talking to Travis and he's like he's not really looking for a response, but he kind of is, but like, you know, and it's just sort of like that. It's nearly seems like, okay, back in the 70s, some like guy like just in the back of a taxi saying this. Nowadays anyone can do that, and many people do look for some sort of odd solace or response or whatever just by like
they
posting
put it on
online.
TikTok.
Exactly. They put it on TikTok, or they put it on anonymous things like Reddit or other forums, and it's just sort of like, it's like the level of loneliness that this film describes is kind of like a fairly default position for a lot of people nowadays. And it's just, it is a very interesting film. Like what you say about relatability, I think is just truer than probably some people would like to admit in that regard now.
Yeah, the screenplay has an epigraph. I forget from who, but it's something along the lines of, instead of considering loneliness as this kind of like exceptional case, we should just assume that it's the general human condition, right? And that's kind of the set of assumptions throughout. Yeah, you notice though, like when he starts actually cultivating like a sense of mission, yes, it is accidental, right? He just sort of accidentally comes across this child prostitute, despite like probably seeing many other child prostitutes in his life, right? For whatever reason, he decides to try and save this one. And there's this kind of like if you were to transplant that psychology to maybe what you see in the modern day, there's definitely this kind of like odd conservative streak, right, to his beliefs and his like kind of like sense for like what kinds of relationships people ought to have. Just in the sense that, like, so first of all, you know, he begins by saying, right, he's looking for some sort of, you know, rain to wash away all the scum and the filth, right? That's a very kind of, you know, conservative kind of a sense, right, that we could imagine, you know, being said today all the time. When he is so he's buying all these guns, right, which to him is not anything immoral, right? It's just like something to do. It doesn't matter whether it's legal or illegal, right? He needs to have guns for whatever reason. And ultimately, after he's told, you know, you could pay for this, and that, and he buys everything, the guy starts offering him different kinds of drugs, right? He starts naming, like, you know, weed, you know, amphetamines,
PCP,
whatever, cocaine,
yeah.
And then Travis Bickle gets this disgusted look on his face, like, no, I don't want any of that stuff. You know, kind of like, how dare, after buying all these illegal weapons, how dare you even, you know, try to propose
I got an
that I buy these
observation,
drugs?
I wonder, did James Cameron probably watch this? Do you notice the font in the beginning is very Terminator-like? It has that like square-ish, that it's the same font, I think. And then when he goes to buy the guns, remember when the Terminator does it, goes, so which one will be? All. And here again, Travis gets all. You know, I don't know. I don't know how much of that, because I just recently watched, I go, I wonder if that was, because I was also going to mention that, I don't know, have you ever seen, either of you ever seen the Mike Leigh film Naked, or any,
No, I've never seen it.
No.
Oh, because I noticed how much Mike Leigh was really influenced, not just by Scorsese, but especially Taxi Driver. And if you've not seen the film, that is also about a loner, but it's a different type of loner. He's sort of an intellectual kind of stylist type, and he pushes people away, whereas Travis wants to get close but can't. And there's scenes in there that do remind me a lot of not just Taxi Driver, but After Hours, and it's set at night. And how I also know a big red flag is in one of his other films. It's got a picture of, you know, Travis on the as a poster in the, you know, so it's clear that Mike Leigh, I'm going to watch a film again, probably review another one of his films, but that he was influenced by that film. But it's definitely, you can see how much that film is had an impact, just culturally, artistically, and you know, it just, you know.
You could imagine a certain kind of fucked up person having Travis Bickle, you know, as a poster on their wall, But I feel like for men that are much more kind of like normies, one thing that's very common in real life, like there's like analogs to this. Like I remember like back in high school and elsewhere, how a lot of kids that were into film, they were very into Annie Hall, and they were very into Albie Singer as like a really like great and misunderstood guy that was just looking for love, right? When in fact, like he, if you pay attention, he's presented fairly negatively, and these are often from kids that themselves had like various kinds of deficiencies, and they would look up to this guy unknowingly. In the same, I mean, people do the same thing with Woody Allen's Manhattan, right? They view it as a love letter to New York City, which is just such bullshit, right? It's
I think like the thing is as well though is that like thinking of Annie Hall and that like he's a dick, but in ways that it's like if you're like that as a teenager, okay, you're still a bit of a dick, but like it's fairly normal and most healthy people grow out of that. But it's just the problem is that he's a grown adult that is acting this way completely unself-awarely, and it's like that's like it's like I think it's like if somebody's worshipped by like little like shitty teenagers, that it should be a red flag. Like,
but I got one thing to say.
That's like acceptable for that development stage is just completely different. Like
one thing you mentioned you said about the poster with guys on the wall. No, it's actually in the Mike Leigh film, in a film called Career Girls. So it's a flat run by two girls. So they have it on the wall. No, so I just thought that was interesting.
Another observation on this kind of conservative psychology. Did you guys notice how we go through like one like turning point in the movie, or maybe like the first like true turning point, is when like before his like actual break from reality in some ways, he's sort of like sitting around playing with this like big gun of his, and he's eating bread, like white like Wonder Bread. It seemed like torn into pieces with with sugar cubes and milk and alcohol. And this is like the kind of like
has a little nagging and he's pouring it out over
it's kind of like a little like apex like symbol before like a psychotic break of some sort. Even if it's like to Dan's point, it's more kind of like borderline personality. He sort of dips in and out of lucidity in some ways, but when he's back in lucidity, like after this clear kind of like break, when he sees Iris again, he has this conversation after he's taken upstairs. He's extremely lucid, right? And you don't see him that lucid for much of the film, but especially not recently, because recently he was just getting less and less healthy. And it's like for the first time, like we have this break again. We're on the cusp of like no longer really relating him to him all that well, right? When he's like eating that garbage and playing with a gun, back to okay, now he's allowed to be lucid again, and it's specifically when he finds some kind of objective, right? And granted, you could take issue with how he ultimately handles things, but the fact is, like from his perspective, he has suddenly this objective now, and this is enough to sort of like make him behave in a way that's like in reality, in tune with the reality, not away in his own little world again.
Yeah, and I think like I agree, and I think like it's key as well that like when he finds a subjective, it's to do with another person, and it's to do with him like playing out this kind of white knight kind of idea that he has, because like you see him do, it's kind of like prefigured by his whole thing with Betsy, where it's like, oh, you're unhappy, that guy's just silly, and he's not good enough for you, kind of this whole kind of thing is going on, and he very much feels like he wants to rescue her in some way, and it's just nearly like happenstance that he comes across somebody that actually is in need of rescuing, because she's being preyed on by this like predatory pimp who's manipulating this child. It's just like he kind of tries the whole routine on somebody, Betsy, who really needed or wanted from him, and then it's the same kind of thing. He just tries to he has this need to help other people. It's like a lot of like what he's like is stuff that's like you could see it as being a good thing, like he has this desire and help other people. Like that's not a bad thing. He kind of just fundamentally messed up in some way that he has no healthy way to channel that. And it's kind of like, I think it's like how arbitrary the whole ending of him being held as a hero is. It's like it's just the same violence, the same kind of white knight image and all these things. They just happened to be directed in a way that was productive and a good thing. And it's kind of it's just incredibly, like, I think that's one of the big things of the ending, how incredibly arbitrary it all is, and yet he's hailed as a hero all the same.
Yeah, you notice how I forget the name of the pimp, but it's the Harvey Keitel
Sport.
Yeah.
Was it
oh yeah, sport
Matthew
Sport.
yeah,
yeah.
Matthew or sport, yeah. So when Matthew is he's talking to Travis Bickle for the first time, there's this kind of sense, and maybe Travis is conscious of this, maybe not, maybe it's just maybe he's not intelligent enough, maybe this is just only for the viewer, but I definitely got the sense that there's this kind of heightened sadness because as Travis is trying to get some time alone to speak to Iris, Matthew is like very skeptical of Bickle, right? He's like, like, are you a cop? Are you this? Are you that? And he's like, no, I'm hip. And then he starts laughing like, you don't really seem hip to me, buddy, something like that. And it's kind of sad because even this guy that's like a total scumbag, right? This pimp with this like child prostitute, he is still kind of inside like the real world of like people and social interactions. He's still closer in that world enough for him to be able to say, you know what, there's something really off about this Travis guy, right? He's able to see that right away about Travis Bickle, despite the fact that we know, of the two of them, even if Travis has problems, he's not a total scumbag in the way that this guy is. And yet, only this guy, right? To get back to this like insult terminology, only this Chad is allowed to, he still gets all the girls and he gets to sort of be, looked upon normally by the rest of the world. But I always have to be the outcast, but I didn't even do anything wrong. Right. Why? And, maybe Travis isn't consciously thinking that, but I definitely thought that on behalf of Travis when I saw that interaction again.
I think like a lot of it. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go on?
Oh, no. Go ahead. Sorry. I was agreeing.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, okay. I was just going to say like as well, like even like a lot of it is kind of, it's clearly like, I don't know if when you see it kind of like from Travis's point of view, how much he seems to be really cognizant of that, because like even stuff like when you see the whole like the montage bit nearly of him kind of preparing himself mentally and physically and doing this whole routine and regimen that he has going, and he's kind of like doing shit like holding his hand over a hot stove and like like he needs to clean up and stop with the drugs and stop with the pills and so on, and it's just kind of like it's nearly like this perverse version of the kind of montage you might see in any shitty action film, like the hero going through, like you can it's just like you see kind of like this is the way he sort of sees himself, and it's very much like a lot of his kind of like again a lot of his attributes are ones that are like could be like in a positive light, because like it's kind of like he has this drive, he has this persistence, even like his pursuit of Betsy. It's like, okay, like how many like movies or whatever do you see where like the guy goes back and like sort of is able to win the woman by persistence and all this, and it's kind of like he just seems to like not it's kind of he lives in this world where he's doing the right things seemingly, but like there is a logic behind it, but it's just all so off, like it's like unstable foundation that is like fundamentally a little bit not quite in touch with like the reality of things. Like he's just missing something.
And do you notice how
he could be a productive member of society if he had that thing that he's missing?
You notice how Betsy then, when she gets in the cab and she kind of looks at him with more admiration, it's always like, oh, people, oh, you're somebody, and just her perspective of him, her perception of him rather, switches based upon what other people are saying. And so it's like how much of people's opinions about a person are based in actually just what others think and versus what you really think.
Yeah.
She honestly does seem like a pretty shallow person anyways. Like she just like comes off like from what you see of her. Like, I mean, she agrees to go on the date with him. Like, why exactly? Like, it's clearly not for any like deep reasons on her part. Like, it's either because it seems to me to be some comment like he's good looking enough and like, he has a certain intensity about him or whatever, that like maybe she just sees, oh, he's like very so different than like Albert or any of these other guys she's kind of surrounded by in this like very white kind of educated environment. And it's just like, like, but none of those are particularly good reasons.
Well, and I think he flatters her. I think she's flattered
Yeah,
because
that too.
you know, she likes the attention. She sees that he idolizes her, and she's like, hell yeah, you know, she's bored and like, why not?
Yeah.
How much do you guys think of the like last scene with, for example, getting in the cab and the letter being read out? How much of that do you think is mere? I mean, because there's like enough plausible deniability that you could argue either direction, but how much of it do you think is sort of supposed to be or is based on the evidence in the film, just kind of like a wish fulfillment? I mean, you know, everybody would have that sort of revenge fantasy of now you do something wonderful and the person that spurned you is looking at you with admiration and is sort of like missing what they could have had, right? And he does that perfect sort of thing where he doesn't even take her money, he doesn't even try to like ask for her number again, he doesn't try to see her again, he just sort of moves on knowing that he, you know, had the better of her in this kind of interaction. I noticed when the letter was being read and you had those like newspaper clippings from all the you know, gangsters and pimps that were killed, there was a photo there that they used, and under it said Travis Bickle, but it looked nothing like, at least to me, like I did sort of like, you know, pause it and zoom in, but it looked nothing like Robert De Niro, the Travis Bickle of the film. And I'm not sure if I saw anybody commenting. I'm not sure if it's just kind of like a trick for me. Maybe I'm just like missing something, but it seemed like a totally different person, right? Which sort of might give a little bit of evidence back to the side of, you know, this is just kind of like a little bit of a dream that he's having. And this is just kind of like how one of the details played out.
I didn't notice that. I thought it was,
wasn't it that as well? But
it wasn't that his picture though. His taxi picture was just sort of like, he's like this. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. It just seemed to me, but anyway, and also the letter itself. I remember reading some sort of analysis a long time ago. I forget the details, but I was reminded of it this time when it seems like some of the phrasings and some of the mannerisms of just like speaking sounded a little bit like Travis Bickle's own strategies, like when he's writing his letter to his mother, and how he would have sort of like statements with like, you know, emphatic sort of like full stops, you know, like moving from like piece to piece in this kind of, you know, almost clunky sort of way, like a person that maybe doesn't really write too much. It had the same kind of feeling. And again, like you could say a little generically, most people are like that, so, you know, who cares, right? So this isn't like you know, evidence for like another sort of dream in his head, but, you know, it's another like interesting little detail how, you know, both of them were in the position to write letters and they both sound pretty similar. Right,
yeah, like I do agree that letter came off as like oddly to me, and I think like that is a good point. I think that, to be honest, like even if you do take it that like it's genuinely from the father, it's sort of like it's still I couldn't help thinking that like there's still a reason she ran away. And it's sort of like, okay, it could just be some sort of like thing that, you know, some sort of family issue that could be ironed out, and maybe like they're not terrible parents, but like let's be real, chances are abusive or neglectful or there's actual issues there in some way or other. And it's just like, you know, even if it's a real letter, maybe the guy is just trying to present an image, because fundamentally, like Travis, when he's writing these things, is trying to present an image, and that's another similarity. Like, I mean, the dad is trying to be like, oh, we're happy family, she'll never have cause to run away again, but like what exactly does that mean? Like, you know, like we don't know, he could be like molesting her, or they could be abusing or neglecting or whatever other reason, because there is a reason she ran away in the first place. There is a reason why she's susceptible to the attention of you know, Matthew as well, like the pimp, because it's sort of like, you know, she clearly, like the way he treats her, he just basically puts up this facade of offering her love and attention in some way, and she just like eats it right up. Like there's a reason. I don't know, I don't think a kid that's from a really loving and tight-knit family where they genuinely feel loved all the time is going to like be vulnerable in that way and is going away in the first place. So it's sort of like, you know, in a surface level thing, it's this whole great wish fulfillment and that, but like, I mean, is like, and it is for Travis's purposes, because he was just like, oh, you know, go home or whatever, but like, is it really, you know, like there's a lot that's sort of like unanswered that sort of clouds the whole wish fulfillment aspect, even if you do take it at face value that it really happened.
Yeah, those are all very good points, and I think that would bring more credence to this idea of, you know, going back to a kind of like conservative psychology. You could imagine Travis Bickle having this sort of dream, right, where he imagines that, well, look, she returned to her family, and that's all
Mm.
that matters. As long as you have
Mm-hmm.
family, guys, right? That's the
Yeah.
most important thing. Your
Mm.
biological family. Forget everything else. Your family, family, family. Like a lot of people do have that kind of mentality. If he's
Yeah.
kind of simplistic in his ways of thinking anyway, and he leans kind of psychologically conservative, you could imagine, you know, this sort of coming up as, you know, bits and pieces of his own wish fulfillment. And it's just so incredible how this movie has so many, like, it gives you so many like little, you know, stops and starts and different ways
Mm-hmm.
of interpreting things.
Mm-hmm.
And like any number of interpretations would work very well, right? And, you know, there's a lot of cleverness there, how the evidence gets presented and how the narrative gets built up in that regard.
Have you ever met anyone though who I've known a couple people who watched it and heard the praise and they were like, "What was that?" Or they were disappointed by it, and I'd be like, "You got to rewatch it." Have you ever encountered anyone like that?
Um, no, but if I would, I probably wouldn't know them for too long, you know?
Oh, it's somebody that it's someone we know, but I won't say.
Oh, yeah, very, very curious, right? Even for the patrons that there's certain secrets that will not be released.
There's a lot that keep them subscribing. Just like do a reveal
You know
video
what?
and
I think
we-
eventually, when it gets big enough, we should have like $100 tier, and that's just going to be the pure gossip tier. I know Jessica would absolutely love that. She would just get on it. She would just gossip. And if you were to pay us
Gossip?
$100, we'll gossip for you.
No, it was funny because Ruslan had when he emailed me, he was like, "I like the banter."
Yeah.
Hi, Ruslan. No. Oh, you know what you should do? I see sometimes at the end of videos they say, "Shout out to my patrons." I don't know if you ever did that, but whatever.
Yeah, probably eventually I will. Yeah, but so far I like the way things are going. Actually, Keith and I are meeting up in his apartment for the first time in a few days, and we're gonna do a recording of like another movie macro on another Scorsese. We're gonna do Goodfellas and Mean Streets double feature.
Mm. Okay,
Right.
that's good. I still think like two of his neglected ones are the After Hours and
Yeah.
the other Rupert Pup King of Comedy.
Yeah. Did you guys see any other Paul Schrader films? Because I saw. So first of all, it seems like when Paul Schrader works specifically with Scorsese, maybe, you know, something changes in the script. Maybe they both end up hammering something out together. But so like he also did Raging Bull, right, which is extremely good. He did this, but that's working with Scorsese. The non-Scorsese of his that I saw was he wrote and directed Light Sleeper from like I think the early 90s or like 93 or something like that. And I mean it was just like a much weaker film. There was also American Gigolo, but I never saw, so I can't really comment.
I've seen the Mishima film, the Mikio Mishima film, and I'm like, eh. And then that wasn't
that was my response to Light Sleeper. Yeah.
And then I saw the one he did on Patty Hearst, and I don't remember what it's called. It has Natasha Richardson as Patty Hearst, and it's a good, solid standard. There's nothing great about it. Like I can't even remember the title, but I do remember the Mishima film being extremely melodramatic. But again, the character, the guy himself was, but I don't know. It was a little. It didn't. I don't know.
I noticed Mishima attracts a lot of very sort of artsy poser types.
Yes.
For whatever reason. I mean, it probably because of the whole kind of like melodrama, right?
Well, the suicide, the melodrama, the way he goes and kills himself. I mean, the guy was a total narcissist. I mean, he was all about attention, and and I think the people who watch that kind of see themselves in it. And there was, I knew an individual from the past who was obsessed with that movie, and I didn't get along very much with that person. But
$100 tier, we're gonna hear all about it.
I'm just gonna drop little bombs and be like, I don't like that person. I'm not going to name names.
We just like keep a record of every time you like make a comment like that. That could be like the $100 tier video. Then it's just like a little like clip of you and all these videos, and then you say, "Actually, I was talking about."
Yeah.
Yeah. So
do you have anything else to say about Taxi Driver?
No, I said I do have a review. I got a review coming, so I'll have more in there. So
I don't know. I do think actually when you're talking about the conservative thing, if I want to be all like inflammatory and shit, like because you've been talking as well, like you've done some videos like the one with Dan about Jordan Peterson and that. Like I just think that's like a really prescient film for that thing. Like even the his like conservatism, it's very like it's very much like sort of foretelling like this, like a lot of like this online culture, like the incel thing, a lot of these alienated young guys that are sort of like looking for some sense of purpose, the sort of like drive towards more conservative values, or at least the posturing to do with it. And it is just kind of interesting how much the film managed to kind of tap into that, especially like because I've never seen any more of Paul Schrader's films. Like he somehow just managed to do that in this case and wasn't able to replicate that kind of insight elsewhere.
Yeah. It seems like alongside Scorsese, right? There's good things that happen, whether it's this or Raging Bull. I mean, who knows, right? It seems like a lot of directors, when there's like co-writing credits or even just like pure writing credits, I can imagine Scorsese just wanting to do either his own things or like filming things a certain way that might naturally exclude pieces of a script. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
But I mean, this was like just extremely well written, right? Very, very memorable. I mean, obviously it's part of a culture very much at this point, right? There's references in films, right? There's references in books. So
I thought Ebert made a good point. He has, in one of his reviews, he's got 2 reviews of it, but he made a good point where he says, he does "Are you talking to me?" And he goes, "Well, but I'm the only one here." And he said, "People never finish the sentence. They just leave, 'Are you talking to me?" And he goes, the full line being, "But I'm the only one here." So it's like the only time he's talking to himself, even like he just has nobody. And just, I think exemplifies just the aloneness. And
early on we have that line, "I believe someone should become a person like other people," right? And it's you could tell like from a statement like that there is no actual directionality there. The only possible directionality in that statement is towards whatever kind of social mush is out there that looks attractive to a lot of people, especially if you're, say, like very young, right? You might want to feel more like other people, you want to feel better adjusted. But here, as an adult, it is adjustment for the sake of adjustment. It's almost as if he's not, at least at the beginning, he's not so interested even in assessing whether or not these are valuable adjustments, right? It's just kind of like as long as it staves off the loneliness, right? Maybe it's an adjustment that I can make or should make. So there's a lot of like little quotes that he drops, and you could tell like in a weird, they're well written in the sense that by itself it wouldn't do anything, but in the context of the film, you could tell that this is something that this guy thinks it's deep, right? For all the wrong reasons. It reminds me of like one time when I was working at some school, and there was this guy that was working with me, and he would often have a little notepad, and he would write little things there, and he would write with like very slowly with these like very sort of like fat, like these like fat pen marks and these like big blocky letters, and it's always be capitalized whatever observations he was making. And then I looked over one time, and he was writing one time, "The power of the mind," and that was it. And then he wrote it down. Then he just sort of like lay back and just kind of like just like thinking about the statement, think about the implications and the depth of that. And I mean, this these sorts of like little phrases that he does, right there, they capture that mentality pretty well.
Yeah, there's definitely an underlining profundity to rather straightforward statements, which is an indicator of something that is well written, when you can have a simple statement that underneath it, you're like, oh, that's actually quite much deeper than you realize. That's a sign of some good writing, as opposed to, a lot of times you'll get people, if they're not very experienced, they usually try to get all florid and, use a lot of, these excessive modifiers or over describe, but sometimes it's just the very simple, straightforward statement. Or when he says, he does say, I'm God's lonely man. And he says something about change. He goes, and then there's change.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he wants to take on something, and then there's change. And it's just like, that's kind of how life is. And then it goes and goes and goes, and then there's change. Something changes, and then it's never back the same the way it was. But it never feels like it's going to happen, but then it does, and life changes.
Yeah. I have to make a confession, Jessica. Speaking of floweriness, a book that you sent me a long time ago, Mishima's trilogy. I never could quite get through the
I
whole
sent
thing.
it to you?
Yeah, very long time ago.
Why did I sent you like physical copies?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's weird.
And I never quite could get through it because it was just way too flowery, and you have to like push through, you have to slog through like so much description it's not even that good, right? But it was just very difficult. It was very difficult to get through.
What would you like? I think he's the spring snow and the quartet. Is that what the one you're talking about? The quartet.
Yeah.
I actually, from what I recall, and I read a number of his books, the one that I thought was his best that I recall, again, it's been a while, was the Temple of the Golden Pavilion. And I thought that was really well written, but the ideas weren't deep, but the writing was better. And so like, he's sort of like a very shallow writer, but he can write certain phrases well and make it like, you know what I mean? Like sometimes, but no, I know what you mean. I do know what you mean. And I know
that also reminds me of someone that we know.
Oh, at the end we'll have but no, I do know what you mean in those books. That's why for me, I much preferred Tanizaki or Kawabata over him, because he was and is, obviously he's very melodramatic, and I mean, it's been so long since I read him though, but
yeah.
How much of that, because I've never read it, but how much of that do you think you could chalk up to translation, or did you read like a few different translators and kind of get the
he is like, no, I've read, now I can't, again, off the top of my head, I have to go get the books and see. I have read a number of the Japanese writers, and some of them just are very good in terms of depending on which, in any translation. Some are very like block letter, like very rigid, like who I don't think, I'm not impressed with that much is, who's the guy, Murakami? The guy he's more contemporary. Yeah. And he has, I think his translator is this guy, Jay Rubin. And Murakami is kind of like, it's not bad, but it's not great. I mean, he's just sort of like overindulges, I think, in the excess symbolism. And then you have so much just weird shit happening after a while, it kind of loses its meaning. And
like Murakami, like he focuses on that weird shit, and you notice this a lot. This is like that animification, right? By that I mean anime, right? This kind of like anime style of, we're gonna go with some melodrama, we're gonna go with weirdness at the exclusion of, in lieu of, actual character development. I mean, those characters aren't interesting. Like when I was doing with Zeke, that Drive My Car plus that other film. Like it was just kind of like, it was just let's get a little weird. Let's do these kind of like heavy-handed, obvious symbols, and that's going to be the thing. And like focus on some, like some of the visuals were good, right? But you can't just depend on that, right? This is why so much of like Japanese animation fails, right? You have so much oftentimes technical execution, and yet there's actually nothing there, right? It doesn't actually matter, right? It's just kind of a waste.
it's like watching a Lars von Trier film. I mean, a lot of his films are filled with weird shit, and some of them are very well shot. And I can't complain really about a lot of his cinematography or anything, or you know, but storylines, and it's like he's trying to be Bergman, but he doesn't have the depth. And comparatively, like Mishima's, it's just, he's very, very melodramatic. He really is. And I just remember him being a pretty good wordsmith, but you know, the ideas were kind of piffle. And it's one of those things, you know, you read it and then you move on, you know? Whereas I felt like I got a lot more out of Kawabata or Tanizaki, you know, those, their best works. It just all depends, you know.
Sorry, I just have to let my cat out.
Is that Teddy?
No, it's Kizzy.
Oh, Kizzy. Okay.
She was asleep on my bed, and now she's trying to get out. So I'm just going